Ladies and gentlemen, it's Chase with Semi-Pro's Garage, and we're back out here to bring you another video. And what today's topic is going to be is part 2 of our electrical / wiring video. So I believe what we ended up doing on the first part of our video was we showed you guys the battery relocation kit and followed power and brought it up and showed you where it ties into the fuse board and the relays and everything. And so what we're going to do today is from the relays, like show you where how the switch panel and everything works, and our power, power blocks or power terminals and everything, dive into like where power goes in and out on those, and then touch on like our inputs and outputs and everything on the car. I won't really be able to show you guys, have everything powered up and show you, the trans brake stuff and like how we have everything, what everything does on the switches and all that, because, so nothing really going on there. So I won't be able to do all that, but I will be able to power the switches up and show you like the line lock and stuff like that, and show you where the power goes in and out from the relays and all that. I will end up showing, some of the wiring on the boost solenoids and the trans brake wiring. Like if you wanted to wire up a solid state relay, how you guys would do that for a trans brake, and then show you how to wire up your boost solenoids. This car is dual solenoids. We have it where the ECU and the map sensor control the solenoids, and the solenoids just do the work for you. So I'll show you how to have those wired up, and then when we get the laptop out, I'll be able to go into the inputs and outputs and show you guys like the test mode for like your fuel pump and some of the inputs and outputs and everything, and how we have it working on the car. And I'll probably will do a little bit on, loop, like how you set up a loop and everything to where you can have multiple purposes on one output on the car. So that way, for example, our car, we use the bump button it's our bump while we're sitting still, but once the car starts moving, it's our scramble button. So we'll take a deeper dive into that and show you guys how we have that wired up on the car and how you could mimic that. We went through and just used the recommendations on the install guide of like the inputs and outputs. We had them freed up, so the ones that they suggested are the ones that we ended up using. We haven't had any issues because of that. I mean, I've seen a little bit of like guys that will use different, like they'll end up using like a medium power or instead of a high output or something like that, and have issues. Sometimes the frequencies are a little bit different. Sometimes, we just ended up following what the install guide actually recommended, and we haven't had any issues because of that. Because when you start kind of trying to mix and match and use medium current for high output and stuff like that, you end up running into issues. So you guys definitely have to do the research to figure out what you can actually use, like a solid state relay or our boost solenoids and everything is all high current. We use high current on that. And just for those who don't know, the injector outputs that you have on this ECU, those are high current as well. So if you run out of high currents, or you can use a high current on something that's a medium current. Like if the device that you are trying to use your, just say a different, solenoid or, something you're trying to power is a medium current and you already have all those, you can use a high current on that. So we'll touch base on all that stuff. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to flip the camera around, get everything situated, and get in the car, and we'll show you guys the switch panel and all that stuff. So here we go. All right, so here we are again, and I got a little attachment for my camera that will make the the light output a lot, it's going to be a lot easier for you guys to see this time, instead of me using a flashlight or a headlamp or whatever to jumble everything around. So the last time we were in the car, I went ahead and showed you guys As far as the relays, I went from, trace power in up here and showed you where it landed on my fuse board, took it to my relays. So now I'll be able to show you, I have my terminal blocks down here at the bottom for my inputs and outputs on my relay. All, everything that I have powered up over here, and then the terminal blocks up here are for all my inputs and outputs, and I'll be able to dive into those, and I'll show you guys a little bit of that. So basically, I'll go ahead and turn power on to show you. So how I have everything laid out and wired on this car is my fuse, or my switch panel, it sends power to the bottom part of these terminal blocks down here, as you can see. So this is the input side on these lower part of this terminal block. This is the input side. This is my triggered power, switch power on the input of my relay. So whenever I hit a switch, and I can show you, let's just say I do, this is my line lock. So flip that, you guys can see that that's powered up. So for my line lock, it would be over on this terminal block over here, and it powers one of the relays over here, but I kind of have some stuff in the way. So let's just say, for video purposes, power comes in, and it's going to go on the input side of, let's just say, this relay, right? So power goes in, well, whenever it comes back, that's its triggered source, and then it has an output, which is going to be here. So every other on these is my output. So it's input, output, and so on. So the output side of my relay is on the bottom is going to be every other one. So I have a device here, 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 and here, and so on to the next terminal block that I have there. So power comes in. Whenever I switch and flip one of these switches, power goes, let's just say, and on this wire here, because actually that first switch, actually this is where power would come in at. Comes in here, goes up to the input side of my relay, right, which is this one here, and then comes on the output, I believe is the yellow. So then my output comes down and lands here, which then would be this one here. That's what powers my device. So the way that I have everything wired up with these terminal blocks, and I touched on this before, the reason I did it this way is because I think that this is in my opinion, one of the cleanest and best ways for you to wire something up, where if you're not going to do connectors on everything, to have a terminal block. That way you can remove it from a circuit easily. And I'll go ahead and turn these off. It's a lot easier for you to remove something from the circuit by being able to unhook it, disconnect it that way, instead of having to cut wires or just making everything harder on yourself. So I like that idea. I think it actually looks relatively, in the grand scheme of things, I know that's a lot of wiring, but it actually turned out really good. Now, I did the exact same thing for my inputs and outputs. Now, what I will tell you is, if you ever have questions and you're wondering about all your inputs and outputs and like how you should, which ones you should use for what, blah, 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 the install guide, even the install guide, I think it's like 20 pages. It gives you a pinout of your, like, what number wire on that connector, and I believe it starts from this way, would be like, 1, 2, 3, and you just work your way up, and then you go to the next row, and I think there's 12 pins in one row, and then I'd have to go back out and look at it, but like it has a whole pinout and everything just on the install guide. Now the actual manual, that's like 300 some pages, that's going to be for your actual ECU, it goes way farther in depth on that. So if we were in a scenario, and the reason I'm bringing this up is we were in a scenario when I bought this car that the wiring color, I bought this second hand. So the install guide that I had that came with everything, when I bought it, it was for a specific, engine and transmission combo that was a little bit different from what I had. So the wiring color, the actual color of the wiring for my inputs and outputs was wrong. It was different from the install guide. So what I ended up doing is, in order to figure out what exactly my input and output was, now if it said it was an analog, it was an analog. If it said it was, frequency or 12 volt switch power, that's what it was. But in order to figure out, I couldn't just use the pinout and find the wiring color, because you end up having like this whole bundle that comes, and it tells you this is your inputs and outputs, like when you do your install guide. You should just be able to look at the wire and say, oh, okay, that's going to be for this. Well, it wasn't the case. So what I ended up doing is taking these main connectors off and counting the pin number until I found what color the wire was here, and correlated it with my inputs and outputs here. And it was a way for me to simplify everything and make it exactly how it should have been from the beginning. But that was not something that MS or Megasquirt or MS3 Pro or anybody did. That was just something that you can do if you buy one of these harnesses secondhand. That's something you can do to make your life a whole lot easier. So, I counted everything out, and I believe I'm using almost all of the inputs and outputs on this car. I have a couple that are spare, and I also, in my generic sensors, I'm only using about 3 or 4. At the end of this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you my layout and I'll take a screenshot of it because I keep it on my phone, of exactly the pin number, which I don't know if you guys can see it or not because the light is so bright, it might like just wash it out. But I have each one of these is labeled with the pin number that it is on the connector. So I have it in my phone that way as well. So that way I know the pin number and the color of the wire and everything, and what exactly I'm using each one of those inputs and outputs for. You guys, I did it the way that MS3 Pro actually recommended it. How they recommended it with this ECU and everything. I just used their suggestions, and it worked out really well for our combo. So feel free to copy that. And we haven't run into issues where, if you have to end up using, if you don't have any more high current, or you don't have any more medium frequency or medium current or whatever. When I did it the way that they suggested, it actually worked out really well for the car. And as you can see, I got pretty much anything and everything, done to this thing that you can think of. So, I'll attach that screenshot at the end of this video to show you guys how we have everything laid out, and you can just use that as a reference. What I'll touch on really quickly is, I have my... I'll touch on the trans brake solenoid, which I have here. I have my solid state. Use a solid state relay. Please do yourself a favor and use a solid state relay. They can handle, they work a lot smoother, a lot faster, and they can handle the amperage a lot better than a standard relay. Could you use a standard relay? Probably, but I didn't want to take the chance. So I bought a solid state relay. You could just Google solid state relay and see which one pops up. They're all, you're going to wire it in from, it's 4 wires. So I think that might be one out of like a Jeep Cherokee, to be honest with you. I bought one new at Advance Auto. Basically that gets it gets 12 volt power, it gets power to the solenoid, and then it gets a ground wire and then an output from so it's 4 wires, output, ground wire, 12 volt, and power to the trans brake solenoid. So, and I might have just repeated myself, but it's 4 wires. So I'll be able to show you guys the little layout of that. I got the paper printed out, and I did it, and I used the actual output that they recommended in the, I believe it might be in the install guide actually, the short install guide, and I know that there's a copy of it in the manual as well. Use a solid state relay if you're going to be working with a trans brake. Just make your life easier. They last a lot longer. They can handle the amperage. It's just it's better all around. Just trust me. So, like I said, you could probably use a regular relay, but I wouldn't do that. Now I will touch base on you can see that I have dual Mac valves or boost solenoids, whatever you want to. I think they're, doesn't really matter. They both work the same exact way. So these get, as you can see, I have power going here. These are one of my wires. It gets a output, which is up here, and the other one gets a power wire, which is this here. So power wire going here. So it gets power and an output is how these operate. I wanted everything, and I'll probably will do a separate video on this boost plumbing, but I want to touch on it now that I'm in the car. I wanted to be able to use dual solenoids to have the ECU control everything that the car would need. So basically, how I have everything with how it works with dual solenoids is each one of those gets and it doesn't matter which wire you use, you can switch them. They get a power and they'll get an output from the ECU, and you designate in your tuner studio what's fill and what's dump, and it allows you to select the output. So what I have right now is the air compressor coming in, the pneumatic line coming in from my air compressor, from my regulator that is here, as you guys can see. And I did it, this is a 3/8 line instead of the 1/4 inch, and I did that so that I would remember. So 3/8 line for my boost control here that runs down, and then it comes up, runs under here somewhere, buried in there, and it runs up to my fill solenoid. Now, the reason you do it that way, and this right here will show you, I have what goes to my wastegates is in between my dump and my fill solenoid that you can see there. So from your compressor, you only have to run that through the input of your solenoid, because the only job that compressor has is to move air, to fill air, positive. You're not dumping from your compressor, so you run it through your fill solenoid. Then you have your line in between the two that is basically like brass piping that joins the two, if you can kind of see that. So this line runs to my wastegates, right? So what happens is whenever my map sensor sees whatever my boost target is, it will know to either power this through the ECU and say more boost because this is more air, or it will know to dump the air, which I just have it, dumping out of this fitting here. And that way these two this is their air source. So if the ECU needs to dump, because the air source is coming in between the two solenoids, it can dump or it can fill. So if you're going to use dual solenoids and have your ECU be able to control everything, that's how you're going to want to wire it up. Like I said, each one gets 12 volt power and an output, and you designate in your ECU what is what, and then you basically set target, however you want to do it. There's so many different ways, that you can use. Like you can use boost ramps, and you can use a time delay, and blah blah blah. And the ECU and the solenoids does the work for you. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clip this video, and I'm going to get in on the driver's side of the car, and I'll be able to show you guys more of the laptop side and show you how I have things working electronically via the laptop. So I'll go ahead and attach my pinout that I use for my inputs and outputs, and you guys can reference that at any point in time. So something I wanted to go a little bit farther in depth on before we start getting into our laptop is I wanted to touch more on the trans brake wiring and how to actually wire up your solid state relay. As you guys can see, paper's extremely dirty, but you have the 4 wires that I was talking about. You have your ground, your output, your power to your trans brake solenoid, and your switched power, right? So I ended up using it tells you in the description up here of like what wire you can use off the MS3 Pro for your outputs and stuff like that. I used what they suggested because I had them available and it made it way easier. I could you basically just copy and paste this. So your solid state relay is going to have its own printout, right? So you'll follow that to know like what you're supposed to use, what you're supposed to use for each one of these, right? So, like your wiring, like what wire you're supposed to use for what. Sorry, I had my laptop get ready to shut off, so I'm kind of scrambling for my words. But so you have your ground wire, you have your, this is your output wire off of your solid state relay that powers your trans brake solenoid. So, you have so when I go to turn power on, right, and I flip my trans brake, right, that is my input side. That is the 12 volt power source input to that solid state relay. So power would, let's just say, come into this relay here, and then that's the input side, let's just say that it is, right? The output is going to be that wire there that runs to your trans brake solenoid. So, your switched input side, and then you have it triggers your output side, which then you're able to hear and you'll hear that trans brake solenoid snapping, which I won't be able to show you guys that now, but what I will do is show you how I have it purposed on my steering wheel. So whenever I go to, if I had everything powered up, and I'll turn this light off so you guys can actually see and not be blinded. Whenever I go to power, if everything was powered, and my solid state relay and everything was I had my ECU hooked up and it was grounded and it would actually work, because right now it's not going to, this is wired through the ECU and none of that has any power. It's not grounded or anything, so it doesn't know what's going on. So, but whenever everything was switched on, when you hit this button, that is what would activate my trans brake solenoid, and then my bump button my staging button, right? It basically just breaks the circuit is what it does. So every time you hit this, it just momentarily, just split second, breaks that circuit to allow you to bump forward. Now, what I will touch on probably first thing when we get into laptop is when I am, and it's setting up a loop, and I'll just show you, I think I have 2 set up on this car. I can't remember now. It might just be 1. But whenever I have a wheel speed sensor on this car. When I am not moving at all, this is my bump button. Whenever the wheel speed or my drive shaft speed sensor, doesn't matter which one I use, sees any mile per hour, this button then becomes my party button, moon boost, like don't crap your pants, hold on button. So I'll be able to touch on how to make have multiple purposes on one output. So I'll go ahead and touch base on that now. Let's go ahead and remove this and get it out of the way. And this paper no longer matters. So how we actually have this loop set up, and we'll touch on the loop settings for our scramble, and then we'll go right into the inputs and outputs and like the test mode and what you can use those for. So let's go here, and we're going to go, let's go to advanced engine, and then we're going to go to programmable on off output 2, which is where my loop is. And go down here to loop 1. So if you decide that you want to use the suggested outputs for your trans brake and bump, staging and everything, the way that I did, exactly how they suggested to do, you can literally copy and paste this. So what this does is, it is our bump button. So and even if you didn't want to do that, you have to figure out, if you wanted to use a different output, ours is port K. You can see port K right there. Each output has a designated letter for that output. So it's like, we figured out, my tuner figured out, let me say that. I didn't figure out anything. My tuner figured out what port was designated for the output we were using. And basically how we have it is enabled with the power value off and the active value to be on. So it is active whenever we are sitting still, which you can see the threshold is when we were going to plug things in, anything like it wouldn't let us do 0. It just kept auto correcting to 4. So anything 4 or less is going to be 0. Other than your, for whatever reason, your hysteresis or however you pronounce that, is set at 0. So basically what this means, though, I guess that's all irrelevant, but when we are at 0 mile per hour wheel speed, right, this is our bump button. Port K is our bump button. Now, and this is our secondary value. When the VSS1, which is my wheel speed sensor, is greater than 0.9. So whenever it sees any wheel speed movement, which I have a percentage and like a time delay on my boost ramp, so I probably could, but I wouldn't just launch the car and then immediately grab the scramble. Most services I race on aren't going to take that anyway. But theoretically you could do that, but basically right after I launch the car and it sees any amount of wheel speed, my scramble can be activated by just hitting that bump button again. So if you wanted, like I said, you can basically copy and paste this and use this if you wanted to use your bump or any other output that you have on your steering wheel or whatever to set up. You could do it with your trans brake also. But I probably wouldn't want to do that just because I'm kind of superstitious about things. So, I chose to set up my bump instead of my trans brake button. So you could copy and paste that if you so desire. So now that we've touched on that, we'll go over here to our inputs and outputs, and we're going to go right into test mode. So I'll start by saying with the test mode, if this thing will actually select, there we go. So the first test mode is like your first drop down option right there you can see that you have a fuel pump test mode. Now, what that's great for is, for example, obviously whenever you enable your test mode, make sure that you don't have your injectors on and your ignition on at the same time. I believe there could be a safety in here for that, but if not, you're gonna hurt your motor. So obviously anytime you're enabling test mode, and it does give you a risk warning on there to make sure that you kind of know what you're dealing with before you go in and just start turning stuff on. But what we used our fuel pump test mode for was whenever we did, every time we would make a change and we had to adjust our base pressure, how you can get an idea of what your base pressure is actually going to be with the car running. You can go in and turn power on the car and actually go ahead and just turn on your fuel pump, and it will just go through the regulator and return back to the tank. So you're not just building excessive pressure, but it will give you a base reading of what your pressure is going to be without the car running. Then once you start the car up and it's sitting at idle, and you can check your fuel pressure, adjust your regulator, and pull your vacuum line off to get a true base pressure reading on your fuel pumps. So, that is a good way for you to go in and check your, and even, my tuner that tunes Holly and Fuel Tech and Megasquirt and everything, he loves these settings to be able to go in and troubleshoot. So the next thing I'll get into is and I'm going to try not to make this video super long, but here is I believe this is the second, let's see. Yeah, this is the second, literally on the output test mode, it's the second one down. And we have on this, and you'll be able to reference my printout that I've attached where you can see what outputs I'm using. So I already know offhand that this injector output and the high current 3 are what I use for my fill and dump solenoids. So we took the car out one day and it was not building target boost. It wouldn't meet target boost pressure. We couldn't figure out what was going on. And one of the ways that we troubleshot the car was we figured out, I located, I believe I could hear the leak coming from the engine bay. So what I ended up doing is I went in here and I turned it on and I enabled my fill solenoid. And I already know offhand, and it's something you have to figure out. Obviously, 50 psi. I have. Let's just start by saying I have this car like it's controlled off a dome pressure is how it's controlled, not a single solenoid. So basically, the solenoids and the map and the ECU control the solenoids and do all the work for me. So I already know what amount of PSI will give me X amount of boost. So it's obviously not going to be 50 PSI on the dome's not going to give me 50 pounds of boost. There's a little math involved, and how you can, how I did it on my car was just adjust the regulator, and I went into test mode to see and to get like an idea of what it would be. I would open, and this is how I tested for the boost leak. I went in and I opened my fill solenoid on the car, and I have my gauge pulled up here for my dome pressure, and I could see when it was leaking. I would put that fill solenoid on, and then close it, and I could see this thing just start to drop. And I knew that I had a bad boost leak. So by opening that fill solenoid and just leaving it on, my compressor would kick on and it would keep air pumping. And we were able to locate and find out that the leak was at the wastegate, and I replaced both wastegates instead of having, a problem with one and then trying to replace one at a time. I went ahead and did both wastegates, replaced them both. Then when I went back into my test mode and I enabled the fill solenoid and then shut it off, I could watch this dome pressure, and this thing after 15 minutes didn't lose any more than like 2 psi. So I knew that I had found the leak, fixed it, everything. So then we took the car out the next time, and I had my regulator and everything adjusted accordingly, and it hit target boost because I didn't have that boost leak at the wastegate, and it wasn't allowing it to, it was keeping it from building the right amount of dome pressure. So that is a huge advantage in something like this. You can make your life a lot easier by going into your test mode and troubleshooting, to figure out if you have an injector problem or a ignition problem, a fuel pump or whatever. You can go in here, enable your test mode, and figure out, what you have going on. It just makes life a lot easier. So obviously I won't be able to touch on all of my inputs and outputs, like what I have them, designated for, but that is just a small taste of how we use this ECU, to make sure that our car is working properly. So the last thing I'm going to touch on is the version of software that we're using. This update is the MS Ultra Beta V3 108, which I don't know if you guys can see that or not, but that version right there, and everybody may have this version by now. It's been attached on, Ben and a couple other people have put it in the MS3 Pro and Megasquirt and all the pages on Facebook. But what that version allows you to do is use 3-step, which is a new, Fuel Tech and all those guys, Holly and everybody had that. And finally, they were able to put that in and give us what we want for drag racing. So I'm going to go in here, and here is the launch limit versus map. Now, how you actually enable that table is under your boost settings. I believe it's boost settings. Let's see. No, it's not boost settings. It's under advanced engine. And I think it's on your launch. Yeah. So right here, I believe it is this one here for your hard limit from map curve, right? That is on, and that is how you enable. Now, I may not be 100% correct on that, and if I'm not, if you do not have that actually enabled, this will not be like your launch limit versus map will not be lit up. It'll be grayed out. So once you have it selected where you can actually use this, whenever you go in, this is what I use to reach my target RPM and boost pressure on my trans brake. So how this actually works is it will, in order for you to get up at the right amount of boost, it will go to, I have it programmed and set to 5,500 RPMs. Now and obviously that's not what I'm going to leave on, but what it does is it allows the car to build a lot of RPM to hit your target boost, to get that turbo spooling. Once Once that RPM is met and it starts to see that your map and your car is actually building boost, it works its way down. It drops RPM as it comes up in boost, right? So now once you meet your target boost pressure, which I believe this is set for like 14 or 16 psi, I'm not 100% sure, can't remember. Then it matches with your launch RPM, your target launch RPM. So basically, the huge benefit of this is if you have this set up right and you know what you're doing with your timing and everything on your launch control, this will cut, like, this is so much better, and it's a lot easier for you to actually get up on the chip or get up on the brake, whatever, to not be sitting at the tree and staging your car for freaking forever, is what it would feel like. So when we had the old converter in the car, obviously now we have a dump valve and all kinds of stuff that helps, but when we've made adjustments to the car, we were leaving in first gear, we were only trying to leave on like 8 or 10 pounds of boost. It would take, 4 to 5 seconds to get to target boost, which may not seem like a long time, but in my opinion, that's too long. That's way too long, especially for that amount of boost pressure. So with these changes and, the dump valve and stuff, it definitely helps. I can probably build 20 plus pounds of boost in, I would say, probably 2 to 3 seconds. So it cuts it in half using these settings. So if you don't already have 3-step, or it's something that you've been thinking about doing where you can use and allow your car to hit a higher RPM as it's building the right amount of boost pressure, and when your map sees that boost pressure, it will lower your RPM accordingly. So this will be your target RPM, and boost pressure is what you leave on when you have this enabled. So I can tell you right now, this is an awesome setting. I'm really glad that we finally have something like this that we can use. And I won't go too far in depth on this video of like my boost settings and everything. That's going to be more we'll do more of my boost settings and how I have everything working on the car. And if you've seen any of the videos previous, you can see that the car, it leaves very well. It does really pretty good on a no prep surface. It's obviously going to do even better on a track. But I can show you how we have our boost settings, and the third video is probably going to be a lot more of your plumbing for your solenoids and your wastegates and everything like that. So this is basically going to wrap up this video for part 2 of our electrical. So the next video I'm going to upload is probably going to be pertaining to the engine build. We're actually going to dive into that, and you guys will get to see a little time lapse or I might clip it a bunch to show you bit by bit of how we're actually going to build the motor. But part 3 of our electrical will be coming soon, so you guys just stay tuned, and go to the Facebook page, follow, and hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to stay up on the latest videos that we post. So until next time, guys, see ya.